Okay, so we're working with the table here. We've started the table, and the way we set it up was with 6 columns and 11 rows. And the 11 rows works perfectly because we have a top row for our subheadings and then our 10 different pieces of data. But now we're going to modify the assignment, or we've decided that instead of 5 countries, we're just going to do 3. So we need to get rid of these 2 columns worth of information. So the first thing that you want to learn how to do with the table is using the table tools up here. You've got this layout and you've got a design tab sort of underneath this conditional tab. The layout tab is where you're going to find most of your different tools here, primarily deleting or adding rows and columns. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight these last 2 columns. Columns, remember, go up and down. And I'm going to go ahead and delete those. Now, as soon as I delete these, though, you'll see now this table is sort of artificially skewed to the left because now I have this big blank space where those ones used to be, where those columns used to be. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this last column, and if you look at the tool right here, it's sort of turns into a double arrow, so you have to be very specific about where you're clicking. I'm going to drag this out to where I want this overall table to be, ignoring the fact that I've accidentally made this last column gigantic, because what I'm going to now do is I'm going to distribute all of these columns. So I'm going to highlight all these columns, and there's a button right here called Distribute Rows or Distribute Columns. And what that will do is, since I have all 4 columns selected, it's going to go ahead and even out all 4 of those columns so they all sort of match. So 2 things happen. Number 1, now I have more room, so my data is not so condensed now. But also I have now evenly spaced it out on the page. Right? So I deleted those 2. I used Distribute Rows. The next thing I want to do is I want to take a look at the way my rows look. So you'll notice here I have one row for languages that is kind of a gigantic row because I have all this extra space that I don't really need. You could manually drag this up, but what makes it look better is if all of your rows match in size. And in general, that needs to be so that your rows are tall enough so that your largest amount of data kind of dictates how big your rows are going to be. So I'm going to highlight my rows here. I'm just going to sort of ignore my top row here. And I can specify the height right here up at the top. You'll notice there's nothing in there. And what that's telling me is I've currently selected a bunch of rows of all sorts of different heights. So I'm going to go in here and specify the height. And you can see as I make it larger, the rest of them are all sort of matching each other. And I'm just going to make it large enough so that, again, my largest row, which for this one happens to be languages, just barely fits, and now everything else fits nicely. Something else that I can do as far as formatting goes is highlight all my data, and besides making it horizontally centered, I can also, since these are now cells or little boxes that stuff is in, I can vertically center it so that it's in the actual middle of the cells. And sometimes that looks better, sometimes that looks worse. I happen to think for this one it looks better, just sort of evenly spacing all your data. And once you have your data looking nice and organized, okay, all your rows are the same size, all your columns are kind of the same size, it looks a ton better. Then you can start working with this design column and start taking a look at some of the other shading options or design options. This one happens to have titles across the top and along the left side. So that's where you would maybe work into some of these ones down here towards the bottom or on the side here, where it specifically is highlighting the top and the left side to kind of help that stand out. It also shades every other line to help you kind of see how those work. You'll notice it undid my alignment, so I may need to get back into my alignment and re-highlight all those. Oops, because I really like the way the vertical centering looks. And this is where you should end up. You can also kind of play with your titles up here. I think these could be a little bit bigger since they are sort of the main subtitles. And you'll see it automatically makes that column wider, or that row taller. I could also make it slightly taller so it really fits nicely. And this is what we're looking for as a final product, is something that is colored nicely, that makes sense. This one makes sense because I have the dark color on the top and the left side, and those are my titles indicating what the actual data is representing. So this is where we should be by the end.